Hi everyone, welcome to Inbound After Hours. Today we have Hana on the show. Hana is the head of marketing at Shopify Plus. Hi Hana, how are you doing?
I'm doing well, and you?
Yeah, we're not too bad, thank you. Again, thanks for your time. I know I can imagine you're very busy.
Middle of the day where you are.
Yeah.
It is, but you know what? Everybody's always busy, so I'm trying to not complain about being busy ever again.
Mourn if we were quiet, wouldn't we?
Yeah,
So
I know, that's the thing. Well, let's kick it off with some questions then, Hana. Tell us a little bit about yourself and how you ended up at Shopify.
Yeah, sure. How I ended up at Shopify. So it kind of was a little bit of a strange path, like I think a lot of people, at least a lot of marketers that I know. So I actually went to school for finance, completely unrelated, and I also never worked in finance. So you can see how it already sort of started off on a different foot. Prior to kind of getting into tech and startups and growth, I actually ran a chain of martial arts studios, which is seemingly completely unrelated, but to this day was probably actually the best education I had in terms of business and growth. From there, that was at a time where small businesses were just starting to come online. Twitter was barely a thing. And, my role was really sort of the collective marketing for all 7 locations, and then also looking at general management for 2 of the locations. And we were really transitioning at that point from very traditional marketing, so print, radio, did a ton of radio, and newspaper. Everybody remembers those little local newspapers, and started to transition to online, which was actually really fascinating because this was a million years ago, but it was really easy to gain local search on Google. And it was, if you actually even just had a website or presence online, you were naturally starting to capture a lot of the traffic that was just naturally growing. So that was kind of my first foray into kind of the online marketing world, and it just kind of snowballed from there. Ran a startup, have done a bunch of consulting from early stage to venture back to large corporations. Prior to Shopify, I was at a company called Uberflip, which is in the marketing technology space. I was there for about 3.5 years, and then moved over to Shopify about a year ago.
Wow,
action packed. So
very impressive. Yeah, I'm sure a lot of people listening would love to be the head of marketing at Shopify Plus. I mean, doing a bit of research, you guys power commerce for companies like Tesla, Red Bull, L'Oreal, Kanye West, Subway. There's just so many. What career advice could you give to inbound marketers out there to get to where you've got?
Yeah. So, so for the people that would love to be head of marketing at Shopify Plus, I would say think about that job. Are you sure? Are you sure that's what you want?
Not your particular job, but to get to your level, kind of thing. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's all relative. I think in order to progress, I think in sort of what is now marketing, which is very different, as you guys well know, from marketing 10 years ago. And 10 years ago is not that far, right? I think sort of the skill sets and the makeup of the market change, particularly if you're at a company like Shopify, where it's SaaS, it's predominantly online. A lot of our growth levers are really using sort of online channels, although sort of we have broadened beyond just that as well. I would really go back to a couple things. So number one, I would go back to the concept of a T-shaped marketer, which I think a lot of people are very familiar with. And that tends to be a repeatable sort of paradigm that even I use as I'm hiring, right? It's a really great way to help people fill the gaps in terms of their skill set. And it's a really great way to understand where it is that they do go deep and where you can either hire to complement or you can grow and develop skills in. I think that the concept of a generalized specialist, if that makes sense, is one that I really kind of tend to gravitate towards. And I think to be able to sort of look at a more holistic sort of perspective when it comes to growth marketing, that's something that I think people need to start to embrace.
I agree with that. Yeah, I agree with that. When we interview people now, we make sure they've got a real specialised area. But as you said with the T-shape, they need to be a bit of an all-round marketer in certain areas, like secondary skills in a way. So we agree with that, and that's something we push for as well. So.
Especially in inbound, we find, because a lot of to do inbound properly, you need a lot of secondary skills in all areas of digital marketing. You mentioned you had a few former roles, like running the martial arts studio. How often do you see things like from your former life come in handy with content, whether it's presentations or?
I mean, so my former life, my past life, makes me feel old. So my role, I did two things. So I was, as I mentioned, kind of did some of the collective marketing that ran sort of across all of the different sort of studios and franchises, as well as sort of general manager for two of the locations. So it was a little bit broader than just the marketing role. And the most interesting thing to me in terms of how those roles related is that, like, the principles of running a business and doing marketing and growth and communications and content, they don't change, right? So a couple things are really interesting. So when I was doing this, think of the type of business that is, right? It's essentially recurring revenue, really, right? So we were building out spreadsheets where we would look at statistics like very similar to MRR, what's the recurring revenue? Very similar to churn, what's the retention rate? So there are a ton of parallels in terms of even just like how that business runs that are really relevant to what I'm doing today. So that's kind of number one. Number two, the importance of feedback loop when it comes to any kind of marketing. So content as well, but I think that just really goes broader. So when I was actually sort of in that past life, I not only was sort of managing kind of the business and marketing side of things, I was also teaching professionally, right? So when we would make a decision that would impact the actual classes, the studio, the students, I could actually implement that right away and get real-time feedback, right? So we're talking feedback in a matter of days. And that was a thing that was really, really valuable. And that was a lesson that I took out and was really able to sort of implement through everything that we do. So I think those are the two things that I would say are probably overlap the most.
I think I've got a teaching background as well, and I think learning how to give feedback to hormonal teenagers has served me well when I've come into into a management role.
Yeah, Paul used to be an English teacher.
Absolutely. And the teaching side of it, just in and of itself, I mean, as I think everybody listening probably knows, comes in very handy when we're talking content, right? Because half the reason you do content is to educate people. So just really understanding the frameworks and how to actually structure something in order to teach somebody and how to reiterate it multiple ways and all of those kinds of things, I think tie in really nicely.
Yeah, true.
I agree. Yeah, thanks for that. What channels are working for you at Shopify? We sort of have a round robin of our studio before we come on these podcasts. Some of these questions are from our team. So, what is working at Shopify at the minute from marketing channels?
Yeah, so I will say it depends, right? So when we look at sort of what Shopify has historically been focused on, historically Shopify was focused on entrepreneurs and small business, right? The funnel for Shopify historically has been a self-serve funnel, right? Zero touch, it's, online channels, it's free trial, upgrade, you don't actually talk to the customer. Obviously, as we started to extend and actually have an offering that's more upmarket, that changed, right? And that was really where Shopify Plus came into play. And for Shopify Plus, it's actually a totally different funnel, right? This is where we're talking sort of marketing to sales to customer success. This is actually much more customer facing. We actually talk to people, which was like brand new at Shopify, right? In terms of actually having conversations with customers and telling them why they should actually convert. And as you can imagine, the channel mix for Shopify and Shopify Plus does look a little bit different, right? Obviously, there are certain channels that overlap that are used across the board, but the approach when you're looking at more of what is, quite frankly, more of a B2C funnel when you're looking at self-serve is actually very different than when you're looking at a B2B funnel. So with B2B, it's less of a volume play; it's more of an intent play. Right? How you execute on all of the channels completely changes. So you might be doing AdWords across the entire spectrum, but how you do AdWords for Plus is very different than how you do AdWords for Shopify. I don't think I can mention a channel that's going to be a shocker to you. I mean, there are only so many online channels, right? But I think the thing is, how do you actually tweak the execution and the approach per channel to have better audience channel fit, if you know what I mean. There's actually a great post by Brian Belfer who talks about, going beyond product market fit. So, audience channel fit is a thing that he talks about a lot, which I really like because I don't think a lot of people think of it in that way. And when we think of channels specifically for Shopify Plus, it's really more about where can we have the most impact and really be the most targeted. So one thing, and I'm sure you guys have been in this scenario before, that you often hear when people walk into a room and they start to talk about marketing, particularly if you're talking about it without marketing people or people that don't quite understand, it's like, oh, okay, so how much more traffic? How many more leads? So how much more isn't the question. The question should be, how do we get to the desired outcome with the least amount of traffic possible, right? How do we get to the desired outcome with the least amount of leads possible? Because that leads to conversion, that's quality, that's indicative of a lot of things, particularly if you're going up in B2B. But if you look at a little bit of a different funnel where it's like Shopify and it's free trial, upgrade, and there's not a huge cost to sending people through a funnel where there's like a heavy lift from a sales team, you can actually probably go a bit wider, right? Because it's not necessarily going to cost you anymore. So my takeaway would be like, really think critically about how you approach specific channels and how that relates to the audience, but also your business model.
Context is king, isn't it?
Context, totally.
Okay, another question from the guys. What have you stopped doing? What's not working for you guys? I know marketing's changed over the last 10 years, have you said. What have you stopped doing in the last 12 to 24 months?
What have we stopped doing in the last 12 to 24 months? Oh man, probably a lot of things. So let's see, where shall I start? We have certain channels that we just totally turned off, right? Because we got a little bit more sophisticated around just the quality of the leads that were coming in through those channels. And we got a little bit more sophisticated around the data that we were collecting. So, and those were some of the paid channels where we just scaled them down dramatically with the full knowledge that we would see a huge dip in volume. But consequently, we also saw a huge increase in quality and deals closed and, the bottom of the funnel stuff. So we've definitely killed some of those. We have also stopped paying attention to some things that you would think you should pay attention to, right? So there are, certain tactics that, from email standpoint, for example, certain segments of our database, where, some people would approach it from the perspective of, oh, well, let's just email everybody because it doesn't hurt. We might as well. So we kind of just very deliberately chosen to just stop paying attention to a specific segment because it's not worth our time or effort or energy, right? So I think, all of the things that we've stopped doing, and I'm sure there's more, but I'm blanking on them right now, have really just been a result of taking a look at, okay, is this actually the most impactful thing we could be doing? Kill it, forget about it, don't pay attention to it. It's mental energy that could be better used elsewhere.
And then double down on what is working.
Yeah. Would you care to name any of them channels what you've stopped? Do you know any of them off the top of your head?
Channels that we've stopped entirely. I don't know that we've stopped entirely. I can say, AdWords is one that we've always experimented with. That's one that we just drastically changed our approach to it, which just meant we now are doing it at a totally different scale, at a totally different volume. One of the other channels that we use, and I'm actually forgetting specifically which tool we use, but we also looked at one of the tools that does like content syndication, and we did it. We got some traffic, no real meaningful impact, so we killed it, right? So those are the types of things where, you know, they may work in some scenarios. I've been at companies where it actually worked really well and did lead to a measurable impact. And in other scenarios where, you know, if you're using content syndication tool, and when I mean content syndication, I mean something similar to Outbrain. I don't think we actually used Outbrain, but that type of tool. It's, you know, if all you're after is page views and clicks, that actually might work really well, particularly if your model is ad-based and you're trying to sell ads. But you know, it doesn't always work well when you're trying to optimize for the bottom of the funnel, which is really what we're trying to do.
So you got me thinking when you were chatting in an answer earlier about a lot's changed over the past 10 years in marketing. A lot of things you're not doing anymore. What do you think we will be doing in the not too distant future?
In the future, yeah, good question.
We'll probably be doing a lot of stuff that we stopped doing 10 years ago. Honestly, like I'm actually now like, oh, maybe we should experiment with radio again. So
podcasts are the new radio, isn't it? Well, that sounds like a really cheesy thing to say, but
yeah.
When do you last listen to the radio? But you stick a podcast on.
Radio on demand, yeah.
Yeah. Radio on demand, podcast. So, I mean, there's so many more forms of media and so many different ways to consume media. There's like iterations of what was just traditional radio, but now there's like so many different iterations of what that is, like what audio content actually is. In which case there are a lot of other ways to do it. I also think fundamentally, you know, we're in a landscape now where there is so much content and so many options. I mean, I'm not going to talk about content shock because I think everybody's heard about it and they know about it. But the reality is, like, consumption also has gone up dramatically, right? So there's still space there, I think, for quality stuff, but it's like the entire world has now been really finely segmented, right? Particularly in the type of content that they consume. So there are great opportunities to get really, really targeted if you can find the right vehicles and if you can find the right type. So yeah, I mean, I'm seriously actually considering radio. I'm like, maybe we should try that. There's podcasts. There's a lot of sort of the more traditional mediums that maybe, you know, 2-3 years ago, I would have been like, no way. Now I'm like, maybe we should experiment more with IRL or in real life. It's sort of how we refer to our events team, experimenting more with offline marketing, but different types of experiences, right? Like not the stuff that you would typically be accustomed to.
It's like Amazon opening physical bookstores.
Yeah.
It just shows how
it comes back.
It comes all the way back.
Yeah.
But if you look at the bookstores, it's a completely different experience, right? So, you know, you look at bookstores traditionally and everything from when you walk in and you look at the bookshelf. In traditional bookstores, the books are all lined up. You can only see the spine. In an Amazon bookstore, they actually turn it so it's face out, right? It's less books, it's less efficient, but it's actually a way better experience because I can actually see the cover of the book, right? It's much more coffee shop-ish. When you walk in, you get a totally different vibe than a bookstore. And guess what? You don't have to carry the book home. You can literally just order it from your Amazon account right there. So it's reinventing those types of experiences because I think what was lost a little bit, you know, in past years is the realization that those like human connections actually do matter and actually can make an impact. And how do you blend that with a really solid online growth strategy, right? Like how do you actually start to see sort of online and offline converge?
It's coming back to that context of a bookshop works now where you can come in, see it, test it. Well, I'm going back to the office now, so I don't need it. So I'll just order it and it'll be waiting for me when I get home.
When I get back, yeah.
And I might as well order like a box of toilet paper and like the hand cream and soap that I need as well all at the same time, right? So, I mean, it's smart, right? And what they're doing with Whole Foods, and there's a lot of interesting things coming out of Amazon. Amazon Go, you've seen that, I would imagine as well. You sort of walk in and scan and you walk out and you don't have to actually pay.
Not even contactless, it's just...
No.
You just walk in and walk out and you feel like you're shoplifting. It's crazy.
What are your plans now for the future? You personally?
What are my plans for the future? I think I need to figure out how to do my job for the next few years. That's probably a big part of it. The pace and rate of change at Shopify is pretty phenomenal. And it's a lot of fun, and the industry is really interesting. But I mean, we're really in a position where, I started a year ago, my team went from 2 to 20 people in 12 months, right? So really looking at accelerating how we look at that level of growth. So for me personally, I think, I'm going to be spending my time trying to figure that out. Hopefully squeeze in a vacation or two at some point. Haven't thought too much more ahead than that.
I mean, that's interesting. That was my next question. How big is your team? So you're saying there's 20 of you now, gone from 2 people. And another question for me personally, because we're working silly hours at the minute, aren't we? We've grown from 2 to 22 in the last sort of 18 months. We're at phenomenal growth as well, and we're finding we're working a lot of hours. How are you managing your time at the minute? Are you 9 or 5, or you kind of 15-hour days?
I would say it ebbs and flows. There are definitely times that are quite a bit more intense, and then there are times where I have my weekends and I get home at a reasonable hour, and it's great. I think for me, as I look at sort of, and we actually talk about this a lot as a team, right? So we talk a lot about how we work together as a team, in terms of like efficiency and like process, but not too much process, staying nimble, but also making sure that, we execute with speed and agility, but it's not sloppy or cutting corners. So there's always that ebb and flow and that balance. And as a team, we actually talk about that a lot. And I find as the team starts to grow, the interesting thing that happens is, and this doesn't always happen, I think in a lot of cases, people think adding more people will lead to more output, but that doesn't always happen, right? Sometimes what happens is adding more people just means everybody individually does a little bit less, right? And then you end up with the same amount of output, which if everybody was way overworked to begin with, maybe that's actually okay. But you also want to make sure that you're still maximizing the per person output to a level that's appropriate. So as the team started to scale, and as we've started to think about a lot of this kind of stuff, the approach that I take is, number one, it's results driven, and performance driven, not hours, right? I actually don't care how many hours people work. I care what the output is, and I care what the results are, and I care that they're responsive and available for their team. Like, that's it. If you can figure out how to do that in 6 hours a day, teach me. Teach me how to do that, right? So that's sort of one approach. The other approach that works really well, I find, with the team, is fast and frequent feedback, with every single team member around every single thing. Everybody needs to sort of buy into that, because nothing should ever be a surprise, right? I find it, some performance review or an impact review or whatever you want to call it, they should never ever be blindsided by anything. Nothing should ever be a surprise. So really having a cadence of fast and frequent feedback lets you have a really good pulse on everybody's sort of state of, as issues get addressed really quickly. So it's tricky because, and you guys having gone through roughly the same level of growth from a people perspective, things break, right? Like every time you double, something breaks, right? Whether it's a process thing or a workflow thing, or the tool you were using doesn't actually accommodate sort of the complexity of your operation anymore. So being very in tune with when you're leading up to that breaking point, so that you can almost break, but then change things before you break, actually is hard to do, but I think really important.
That's a great answer. Thank you, Hannah, for that.
Yeah, spot on.
Yeah, have you got any more before I ask my final question, Paul? Anything else?
Yeah, I was looking through some of your content decks on LinkedIn, and just a lot of slides resonated with something we share when new writers join us. But it just made me think of a really nerdy content question, which we've been asking a lot recently with some new clients.
Okay.
Where do you stand on the Oxford comma or serial comma?
Oh man. So this might be a controversial answer. I'm not a fan, to be totally honest. And I think that answer has changed over time. But and I think I've also become much more lax in my approach to grammar in general. And I think that's partly being fed by really seeing very effective copywriting across multiple mediums be completely poor grammar and completely wrong from that perspective work incredibly well. So I think my perspective, I'm going to say I'm not a fan.
Context is king.
There we go.
Say no more.
There we go. He's a happy man.
You'll do for me.
Yeah, there you go.
The last question we always like to ask at the end of the podcast is, what is your number one tip for marketing professionals listening to the show?
Yeah, I mean, I think my number one tip would be don't get too myopic in terms of focusing on your own domain. I see marketers and growth people reading a ton of marketing books and like religiously reading their growth hacker email, their growth hacking document, really diving into that. And that's good to keep yourself educated. But in my opinion, creativity really thrives at the intersection of domains. One question that I get a lot is, oh, what book would you recommend? And I usually say, don't read marketing books, right? What you should read is psychology books. Or if you're going to read a marketing book, go read the copywriting books from the 60s. Those are great. Ogilvy Advertising, Ogilvy Unpublished. Like there's a lot of really great stuff that speak to the principles that will actually help fuel the tactics a little bit better. So yeah, I would say broaden your scope, broaden your horizons, start to educate yourself in other areas, because that's actually almost counterintuitively going to make you better in your actual domain.
So true.
Great answer. And we'd like to thank you.
Yeah,
Thanks for
you
your
very
time,
much.
Hannah. We'll get this edited. We'll get you a link over shortly.
Thanks for having me, guys.
Yeah, and for all the viewers, please remember to subscribe. We're going to keep these coming weekly now. We've got guests on the show every week. And again, best of luck in the future, Hannah. Let's keep in touch. And thank you.
Thanks so much, guys.
Okay.
See you later.
Bye.
Bye.